All right, so in case you weren't aware, there were local elections throughout the United Kingdom the other day on May 2nd, where thousands of elected positions in local municipalities were up for a vote, particularly in England, Northern Ireland. And as vote tallies continue to come in as we speak, one thing is absolutely clear. The British public has totally lost confidence in the two main political parties, the Tories and Labour. We knew going into these elections that the Tories were just going to get battered. Every pundit knew that. What wasn't so clear was the effect of the Brexit bumbling on Labour, the centre-left of Britain, half of whose constituents voted to leave. Now, of course, Theresa May presented an exit plan where Northern Ireland were, for all practical purposes, still be bound by EU laws on sales tax and farm subsidies. And of course, that contradicts the whole notion of a Brexit. Remember, these EU regulations apply even when goods are passing from mainland Britain to Northern Ireland, which is within Britain, which is an intrinsic part of the Union, such that when goods cross from mainland Britain to Northern Ireland, there'd have to be checks and customs to ensure compliance with EU standards. All of this means that the EU may in fact actually have a veto over the UK's trade policies from within Britain. And so, of course, many are asking, how on earth can you even remotely say there was a Brexit when a major portion of Britain continues to be reduced to obeying rules made by member nations of the European Union? And then Britain wouldn't even have a vote anymore to try to stop it. How's that add insult to injury? So needless to say, May's so-called exit plan was voted down by Parliament 3 separate times. It went down in flames. The Parliament voted to take the no-deal solution off the table. It wasn't even there as a bargaining chip. And then, as if to pour oil on the fire, Theresa May moved the Brexit date, which was supposed to be at the end of March, back several months all the way to the end now of October. So Brits, particularly Brexiteers, leavers, they are livid, to say the least. Absolutely. Boy, did they let the Tories know it. As things stand right now, Prime Minister Theresa May's Conservative Party, the Tories, they've lost more than 400 seats in local municipalities as things stand now. And by the time we finish counting the votes, the loss of 400 may have looked merciful. I mean, we could be seeing several hundred more seats lost by the time this is all over. Now, Labour, too, suffered, though not nearly as much. They've lost upwards of 80 seats so far. So the two main parties are both losing seats. That's the bottom line. And it appears the Tories in particular are really hemorrhaging seats. Now, by contrast, independent candidates, Liberal Democrats, they're surging. The Liberal Democrats have gained nearly 390 seats. The Green Party, their candidates have gained around 70 seats. Independent candidates have won nearly, I think last count, 290 seats. Nevertheless, the Tories and Labour remain tied in terms of their national share of seats. Again, as of now, they're both at around 30%, just shy of 30%, 28%. While the Liberal Democrats are at around 19% of seats, independents are occupying around 25% of seats. So there's no question here. The two main parties in Britain are barely hanging on to a combined majority of seats in Britain. Just literally a few more percentage points the other way. I mean, the two main parties officially combine into a minority. Really stunning stuff. So what's going on here? What are we seeing here? Well, I think there are two main things that I'd want to point to. One specific to Britain, and the other reflective of more general trends throughout European politics. So let's start with what's specific to Britain. I was very impressed by an article written a couple of weeks back in The Spectator, where the author made the argument that the Tories are basically going through a bit of a civil war, okay? They're trying to figure out whether they should embrace the politics of the Cameron coalition, which delivered to them a solid majority government, of which Theresa May is the beneficiary, or should they become the Brexit party, right? A nationalist populist party that would shift their voting base more to the rural areas, led by someone like Boris Johnson, for example. Now, demographic analysis does yield some interesting results here. whether the Tories go with the way of Cameronism or nationalism, either paradigm still gives them a lead over Labour. Again, as the numbers work themselves out in the article, Cameronism gives them a slightly higher percentage over Labour because the coalition is a bit more spread out. But a nationalist populist paradigm still gives them an impressive edge of around 4 to 5% over Labour. However, what these findings indicate is that though you can maintain an edge over Labour by either going full Cameron or full nationalist populist, that edge collapses when the Tories try to sit halfway between the two, as we're seeing play out in these elections, of course, these local elections. They get squeezed out by a combination of a resurgent Brexit-based party like the one just set up by Nigel Farage, which had no candidates for the local elections but are going full steam ahead for the European Parliament elections. Literally in just a few weeks, this may have just been the tremors of the massive earthquake to come. So the center, this in-between Tory party gets squeezed out from that Brexit side, but they also get squeezed out from a renewed center-left. I mean, Theresa May's political strategy has been an abject disaster. Sitting in between Cameronism and nationalism has been a disaster by any standard of measurement. And so it does seem to me to be inevitable that the Tories are going to now have to think of forming a coalition government with the likes of the new Brexit Party and UKIP, with the hopes of creating a new nationalist populist light party, right? We've talked about this now with nationalist populist parties have begun turning their more mainstream center-right parties into nationalist populist light parties. That seems to be the way forward rather than embracing a renewed Cameronism, which will eventually, I think, collapse under the weight of defectors to a renewed nationalist populist party like we're seeing with the new Brexit Party, or even with hopefully a revitalized UKIP. UKIP's taken some punches too. The second takeaway from all this, which reflects a more general trend going on throughout European politics, and Eatwell and Goodwin write about this phenomenon in their book on nationalist populism. It's a phenomenon known as de-alignment. This is what Eatwell and Goodwin call it, de-alignment. And Britain is clearly going through this right now, at least in the last 24, 36 hours. De-alignment refers to this phenomenon where the bonds that voters have had with traditional parties is breaking down, which is making it easier now for new political challengers to rise up and take the nation in a new direction. What's in fact happening is indicative of a political paradigm shift. So what's going on is because peripheral political positions are moving from the edges, the margins, into the center, okay? The centrist parties, both the center-left and center-right, they're in effect being squeezed and squeezed out. They're getting replaced by parties that are benefiting from the voter defections because these voters don't believe that centrist parties represent their values or interests or concerns anymore. So they're going to the so-called far right or the far left parties. And it's the far right that's most benefiting because they're far more holistic than the far left parties that tend to reduce everything to economics, economics and the environment, basically. So for example, in Britain, whereas in the 1960s, around half the population felt strongly aligned to one of the traditional mainline parties, by 2015, only 1 in 8 were. Right? The Brexit issue cut across both traditional party electorates, almost in half. Most visibly with the Labour Party, which has increasingly found itself dependent on two irreconcilable groups, a pro-EU, pro-immigration middle-class liberals versus an anti-EU, anti-immigration blue-collar worker. So this explains why Labour has lost almost 100 seats as well in these local elections. Both Tories and Labour are seen as no longer competent to represent the concerns of an increasing majority of Brits. So now, to make matters even worse for the mainstream parties, the European Parliament elections are just a couple weeks away, the big earthquake. And by all accounts, a combination of the Brexit Party and UKIP are going to run away with it. So we'll certainly be keeping our tabs on that one. But there's little question there is a major paradigm shift that seems to be going on in Britain, where the two major parties are beginning to get squeezed in favor of a new generation of parties ready to carry out the wishes and concerns of a growing portion of the British population.